visited strange sites, conducted numerous interviews, and provided media coverage for several different events. Please help me welcome Daniel Allen Jones.
Thanks, everyone. Hey, everybody. Appreciate the introduction and welcome being here. So, as Kim had mentioned, my name is Daniel Allen Jones. I'm very honored to be speaking here to kick the event off for the speakers. So, as Kim had mentioned, I'm involved with a lot of really interesting things. I'm a musician by trade. That's my day job. But I'm also interested in reporting on interesting unexplained mysteries. And so when it comes to the subject of Bigfoot or cryptids, this is a big area of my fascination, and I like to be able to explore some of these mystery topics as well. I'm fascinated with anthropology, archaeology, history, wildlife, the outdoors, that sort of thing. So it's great to be able to see a group of people like you guys come out to enjoy something a little bit, mysterious, and it gets us out into nature and exploring some of these great topics. I said I'm a musician. Here's my band. I love to tour all over the galaxy, have some fun. They dropped me off here for the weekend. I mentioned exploring unexplained mysteries, so I'm fascinated with a number of different topics. When it comes to this particular subject, I'm going to be focusing on cryptids and ethnography, which I'll be talking about as well. But I also focus on other areas like ufology, which is the study of UFOs and the subculture of UFO interesting ideas. So a lot of cool stuff here. I manage a media platform called the Vortex, which deals with videos like the ones we're doing here for the presentations, as well as interviews and on-location segments to investigate some strange phenomena. I have to give a shout out to my buddy, the late Jim Mars, because mainly due to him, awesome, cool, if you know who he is. He's an author, not around anymore, but he's someone who got me interested in a lot of this because he wrote on a number of different challenging journalism topics that he was willing to kind of try to tackle and do what he could to shed light on. And so because of him, I'm in many ways involved with a lot of this stuff. Got to work with him for a number of years. He wrote some articles before he was a well-known author, particularly on the Lake Worth monster, as well as the Aurora spaceman. So I'm from the Dallas-Fort Worth area in Texas, so I'm not sure if you guys are just local here. How many people are here local in the area or from Louisiana? Awesome. How many of you guys are from out of state? Cool. So about like half. So that's awesome. Yeah, out of state.
Is Texas out of state?
Are we out of state? Are we in Texas right now?
No.
Yeah, it's close enough. But I know that it's great to be able to have people come out for something like this from all around, right? So that's it's really good to be able to see the support. So I was glad to be able to get those two local legends together. We got Goatman, or the Lake Worth Monster, and the Aurora Spaceman, affectionately known as Ned, at the last, not this recent one, the previous Lake Worth Monster Bash, so that was kind of fun. My main focus for my research topic lately has been on the Aurora legend from Aurora, Texas, which is not really what I'm going to be presenting on today, but that's something I'm fascinated with, and collating data for my research project about the history of the local legend there in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So because of that, I also manage a page that deals with UFO reports, sightings, information resources about that topic, as well as cryptozoology. So I manage a page called the Texas Cryptozoology Network, where people can go find out about events, sightings, reports, local happenings, whether it's news or just things about animal behaviors, animal science, zoology in general. I think the basis of cryptozoology should be grounded in zoological science so that we have a better base of knowledge to work with in our understanding about wildlife and just animals in general. So you guys can check that out. And it's not just Texas, that's just because where I am, so we like to connect other places. And if you guys are up for it, it would be cool to see that we could do like a chain of these types of groups that help to support each other. You could have like the Louisiana Cryptozoology Network, really just as a way to have a central hub of networking. So my main presentation for today is going to be on cryptozoology ethnography. So how many people know what an ethnography is?
Not at all.
No one. That's awesome. Perfect. So that's okay. So let's talk about what that means. Basically, an ethnography is a study done by an anthropologist who looks into cultural ideas and seeks to understand them by participating and getting involved with the practices, with the outlooks, seeing what we can find out from the various modes of practice and things that we have within the subculture. So cryptozoology is not only a field of study, it is also a subculture of people who are involved with that study. And as you guys know, and if you were here last night, you heard Russ and all of us come up to share a little bit, there are so many different views, opinions, outlooks, beliefs when it comes to these ideas of what we're dealing with cryptozoology, which essentially is the study of hidden or unknown animals. And tangentially other strange phenomena, because usually there's a lot of crossover. If you're interested in Bigfoot, you might also be interested in other strange topics as well. Not always. Some people are very much into like one specific thing. But cryptids, or cryptozoology in general, doesn't just deal only with Bigfoot, although Bigfoot is sort of like the poster boy for cryptozoology. There's a lot that goes into this subject overall. And so what's really important to understand about this, I think that everyone has a different view on it. It's that cryptids range from large and small to just all kinds of different types of animals or creatures or mystery encounters that are all about things we just don't know what they are. It's a very subjective idea. And I'll also use the analogy of UFO, because UFOs are not a singular phenomenon. It is a subjective term that each one of us might have a different interpretation on. So, and I mentioned this last night, if we were all collectively together and we look out the window and we saw something out there by the water, each one of us might have a different interpretation of what it is that we saw. And our own mental interference can have an effect on that. And that could be being predisposed to all kinds of things, whether it's cultural, upbringing, different ideologies. So different people have different outlooks depending on their own mental state and all of that as well, but there's a lot going into this subject. So I'm going to be sharing about some people that I've met, interviewed, places I've gone to, groups I've been involved with or worked with in some capacity, events, and provide for you guys some resources as to what you can find out if you're interested in learning more, the various outlooks by different individuals that are held by different groups, or things that you can do to get more involved with this field of study, and the group of people who are interested in providing a supportive network to make sure that we can work together to find out more about these interesting topics. So I'd say one of the, and there's so many things that you're not going to hear me say on here, because you can go down the rabbit hole with reading literature, going online, all of this stuff, but I'm going to share things that I've personally been involved with, and all the media you see will be things that I've taken myself or that I'm involved with, videos, pictures, and things like that. So one of the people I think that's very helpful and instrumental in helping to provide information about this field is Lauren Coleman, who has done tremendous work in writing books about different cryptids, Bigfoot, other strange animals, and has a really interesting cryptozoology museum up in Maine that you can go check out. So here we are in Caddo Lake over in Texas, searching for the Caddo critter. I think Craig was here also. We did a little outing after the Texas Bigfoot Conference one year, and that was really awesome. We'll talk more about that later on. So Bigfoot, what is Bigfoot, right? That's kind of what everyone here is interested in and trying to understand. I think it's a fascinating topic. I've been interested since I was a kid, but I wasn't really involved in these more serious approach with research until probably about 13 or so years ago, 12 to 13 years ago. I really started to look into groups in my area, people who were involved, because I didn't really otherwise have a point of reference. I mean, you can see and hear things on shows and movies, but it's really interesting when you get connected with like-minded individuals who are also seeking similar answers to this strange phenomenon. How many people have, or if you feel comfortable sharing, feel like they've had an encounter with what they might describe as what we call Bigfoot? A few. Well, thank you for sharing, because it's difficult to come forward with something which otherwise most people in the world don't understand or would say is not real. So it's something that's difficult for people to actually come forward with. It takes a lot of courage, and I think it's important that we have a group like this for people that feel like they can open up, for people who are understanding and willing to hear out what people have to share. So where does Bigfoot, the idea of Bigfoot, come from? Well, there are ideas that this is a creature, a group of people, feral humans, all this, that go back years and years. But it's really important to remember that the name we use to describe these things is also somewhat modern. Bigfoot comes from a Humboldt Times article in 1958, where it's describing the tracks, the trackway from a place over near Bluff Creek, actually, in Northern California. And I've been there, and I have a copy of this cast they call the Jerry Crew Trackway. And it's really interesting to see that this is how a lot of times in this idea of information being shared and distributed and disseminated through various groups, this nomenclature is now what we use other than Sasquatch, to describe this type of strange encounter that people are having. And I don't think it's a singular phenomenon. I think we just use it as a sort of umbrella term to describe a myriad of accounts that people have and they are sharing about. So it's important to see where did the origins of this idea come from. Well, Humboldt County has a newspaper where this word originated in '58, so everyone's been using it since then, but that word is hard to track down in this relationship, in this context, before that time. A lot of people describe different types of Bigfoot, and this is again one of those cultural issues where depending on where you are in the world and what region or even in the same areas, even in Texas, as you guys will hear, and Lyle Blackburn has written a great book on Texas Bigfoot, we have all these different regional concentrations of what people are describing, and I mentioned the Caddo Critter, the Sabine thing, you've got all these different things, the Dayton Monkey Man, Holly Hem, and they're all just describing sort of a regional concept of maybe what could be like similar ideas of the same thing, but people describe the Sasquatch, the Yeti, the Yowie, Yeren, wild man, wood apes, things like this. Are they all very different? They could be, and again, they could just be interpretations of similar phenomena. There's a lot of interesting ideas about the biology or physiology and anatomy of what Bigfoot really is. There were some questions about Gigantopithecus blackie last night, which could be, some people consider what Bigfoot really is. But it's important to consider that the remains found, what we call a Gigantopithecus, are only like small fossil fragments of teeth and jawbone. So to paint an enormous picture out of that sometimes is interesting, it's creative, but we don't really know exactly what that creature really was or looked like other than what we can kind of extrapolate from the remains, the scant remains that we find in China that are apparently millions of years old. So if that's something we're dealing with now in a way that we can try to relate these different findings to, it could help us connect ideas in anthropology and primatology a little bit closer, because we're finding out that we have a lot of relatives. I know there's a lot of different ideas about what people consider when we relate primates with people, human people, and the great apes and all of this. I am under the impression, based upon the scholarly outlook, that humans are primates. We are in the great ape family. Some people disagree with that, and that's totally fine, but I think that it just goes to show that we're interrelated genetically and biologically. I don't think that, there's a lot of contest when it comes to that, but I do think that it's important to be open-minded that there's still a lot we can learn from other outlooks. This is Elmo. Elmo's 34 years old. I see Elmo all the time at the Fort Worth Zoo. I'm a member. I go there probably because I work nearby. I go there a few times out of the week. Elmo is very interesting and somewhat animate. Elmo has a little son, Bruno, who's just now 2 years old. And this is just to demonstrate, people often describe Bigfoot to be very primate and ape-like. How many of you guys have been able to go to a zoo and spend time, or even at another type of environment or sanctuary around great apes, or specifically like gorillas? Cool. I would highly recommend you do that. If you're interested in Bigfoot, go spend time with wildlife or animals or beautiful creatures like this that are being maintained and helped, and there's conservancy acts and endangerment acts that are really helping to provide these beautiful creatures with like the best opportunity that they can until, or if they ever can, be re-habituated into society. And so there's Elmo and his son Bruno, and it's kind of hard to see, but these are photos I've taken at this location here that you can go and see anytime. So just being able to understand the anatomy of certain great apes is really, I think, a crucial outline, a peripheral outline to what we could be dealing with when it comes to what people are describing as very ape-like traits. Now, I'm not saying that they're apes necessarily, although there's an enormous contingent of people who are what they call apers who do think that they are very much primate-like. Also, really interesting to see the similar qualities in what people describe with like orangutans being orangish, reddish hair, very loose hair, and then also, just some of the shaggy qualities of the hair that we hear about and see in some of the encounters and reports that people describe. Very similar qualities, and it could be that there's some interrelation between what we see in known great ape species or other primate species and what people are describing in Bigfoot encounters. A lot of interesting things. This is Darby. Darby's a baboon over in West Texas. It looks like he's in a cage, he's in a giant enclosure. He grew up with a lady on the couch watching TV and had never been outdoors and never knew any other animals or wildlife. So Darby has an interesting situation. He now lives in this enclosure in a West Texas location, and pretty interesting guy who's really animate and enthusiastic. I got a picture of his foot there, which we casted just to show you have a very long heel and long toe, big toe area, and then long finger-like toes. So some people describe trackways that they discover or even cast as being similar in some ways to the great apes, other than having maybe like a mid-tarsal break or a big heel outline. Some interesting qualities to what people are describing. So when it comes to the ideas of physiology, when it comes to Bigfoot, it's hard for us to imagine missing out on an enormous hulking 6 to 8 plus, some people say, foot tall creature weighing hundreds of pounds that has somehow gone undetected all this time. So it's amazing to consider that really is happening, and I think there's a good argument that's convincing enough to show that there are creatures out there that we just don't know on a collective basis. Some people individually will say, I do know, I don't believe I know. Well, I mean, in public and collectively, we don't. And I think it's important that we do take the people who feel strongly in their own conviction, and whatever it is that they have testimony about, or what they refer to as evidence, to bring that together so we can make this known to the world, what we're really dealing with. If we have that type of anecdotal evidence or real solid hard evidence, it's something that we could really use in this community, scientifically, academically, socially, and in all other ways as well. So a lot of interesting ideas about foot morphology. So when you look at trackways or casts, like you might see here in some of the vendor areas, keep that in mind, because what you're seeing is not the actual foot, you're seeing the depression in the ground that something made by pressing it in and then releasing up and moving, right? So it's like something in motion that's not always going to be perfect. Who here has ever seen like a cast of a Bigfoot cast before? It's like a big plaster cast, right? Well, you can use simple materials like Shelley Covington, Montana, who's going to be here a little bit later on. You can use simple plaster of Paris, or different molds and things that you can use to actually make casts. You can do it on your own. You can press your own foot in the ground and just test out what it's like to actually do that and let it harden and just practice what it's like to be able to do that, not just with Bigfoot only, but with regular things, your own foot, other wildlife. And track and sign is a really big part about being outdoors and starting to recognize and identify certain patterns and elements of what's around you that you might not be able to see. When you're out in the woods, even in a place that's outdoors like this, you can find things or traces of things that you're not going to immediately be able to see. Okay, there's a bobcat, or there's a mountain lion, or there's a bear or something. Well, if we're all seeing that all the time, it'd be a lot more easy to learn about these things. Usually we just find the remains or indication of something that's around us, and usually that happens with tracks or signs or scat, hair, or different things that we see left behind, and we can infer from those details what's really all around us. So a lot of interesting ideas when it comes to that physiology and everything. Some people describe there being sort of a cohesive, coherent language that's used by these supposed creatures. How many of you guys have heard that before, this idea of like samurai chatter, or that there's even more sort of etheric ideas of mind speak, and pretty interesting concepts. I think it's all fascinating. I don't know. I don't claim to have heard anything, but I do talk to people who have. This is Ron Moorhead, and he recorded what we refer to as the Sierra Sounds. How many of you guys have heard of the Sierra Sounds before? Cool. Okay, so some people think that's the real deal. Some people say it was hoaxed. It's curious either way, but it has been touted as evidence for Bigfoot speech or attempted speech. Some people consider that maybe these creatures are actually using mimicry to try to lure in prey. And that's curious because we know that that's a possibility for other animals and wildlife as well. But Ron's an interesting guy. He looks into a lot of other areas as well. He's got some considerable theories when it comes to what these creatures are and how they work and groups and all this. But he recorded these Sierra Sounds in Washington in the 70s, and people really think much of this, but it's something that we have to consider, and it's been looked at by cryptolinguists and people who are trying to decipher what these really are. And there could be something to that. So, keep your eye out when you hear vocalizations, because it could be that we're hearing some kind of intelligible speech, or just ways that are being used to communicate, not just between themselves, but for other wildlife as well. Some people say it's a deterrent. Some people say they use infrasound. And that might seem very wild, but we do know animals like tigers do use infrasound, and that is a very real thing. So it's important to keep that in mind, that with all the things that are being described, maybe not all of them, but many of the qualities that are described by these creatures that we refer to as Bigfoot or people, or however we want to refer to them, that many of these qualities are seen in other traces of wildlife and interactions in zoological settings anyways. When it comes to the scientific aspect, you have people like Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum from Idaho State University, professor of anatomy and anthropology, who focuses on the locomotion and foot morphology in a way that he tries to look at how maybe what we're finding can clue us into not just the physical structure of these creatures, but how they might be able to utilize a different form of locomotion or anatomy than we really understand. Because if you look at some of those other great apes, gorillas, orangutans, chimpanzees, a lot of them can't stand upright. How many of you guys have seen a picture or video or something of gorillas or other apes or primates walking up on two legs for some short amount of time? Right, it does happen. It does seem kind of fun to see that and interesting, but the reality is that the way that their head structures are put together are not like ours in that we can stand upright. They're bent over so that they usually can walk on all fours or move like that. So they're quadruped in that sense, but also can be bipedal for short amount of time. Bears do the same thing. When you see a video or something of a bear walking upright, it's typically either it was reinforced in some kind of setting with people, or it's actually injured, and unfortunately it's hard to tell, but it's walking upright usually because its paw or something's injured. So we do see that, and I think that can account for some sightings, not all of them. I don't think that really does account for like a majority, but I do think people are seeing, unfortunately, things that they misinterpret or misidentify from known wildlife. So Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum has been involved with research for a while. He's part of the Rugged Hominoid Inquiry. He's written a number of books, and the latest one coming out is Legend Meets Science 2. He gave a keynote presentation at Craig Wilheder's event at Texas Bigfoot Conference just a few weeks ago, and it should be interesting to see what they come up with when they put this new book and documentary together, Legend Meets Science. So where is Bigfoot? This is an interesting idea because it's often been relegated to the Pacific Northwest, like up in Washington, Oregon, Northern California, where we think Sasquatch lives. But the reality is that there's a lot of areas all over, not just the US, but the world, that could very well harbor large primates or other life forms and creatures that we just have evaded detection all this time, which is amazing. And I should mention that there's an idea called ethnozoology. So when you deal with a particular group or regional culture who is familiar with the wildlife in their area, and you have foreigners come in who aren't, and they think that they're discovering animals, and in reality the local group or native people there are already well aware of these things. It's called ethnozoology, and it's really important to consider how that does play a role in how modern academics, modern sciences, helps to try to make determinations based upon cultural inference. So it's really something that we can look at through legends, through lore, through mythology, through oral traditions. Whatever kind of records are kept by any particular group or culture can help us in some way to see that maybe some of these potential creatures aren't just newly conceived ideas, but have been known and understood for some time. Like Homo floresiensis is a really interesting concept that the local people there in Eastern Asia and the Indonesian area, and you have all these different small islands and groups that talk about that there were small people that they knew about for a long time. And in modern times, they refer in some of these articles as the Hobbit Man. You guys probably heard about this, but the idea that native people there, or people who have been there for a long amount of time, describe little people, and then science is finding the remains of these said people, is very curious, because if you're talking about not bones, but fossils, fossilized remains usually take long periods of time to form. And to be in the correct setting, and the matrix or material with which it can be contained has to be the perfect way to preserve material so that it can fossilize. Because if you find bone remains, it's usually something organic that's been very recent. So the fossilized remains of Homo floresiensis are small people, they refer to as Hobbit Man, that in some way now are interesting to connect to the ideas of the local people there, saying that they knew of a time when there were or are still little people. So it makes us wonder what's really going on. Are there these same qualities and stories elsewhere in the world? Well, I think that there very well can be. There's a lot of people who have taken the time to go around the world, or even here in the States, to try to make sense of these stories. Scott Violette and his wife actually travel around. They have a cool project called Squatch America. We got together in Jefferson to go look at a location that Craig and others have kind of documented over the years. So that was cool. There's a lot of interesting cryptozoology lore. David Weatherly has done a tremendous job of trying to really collate all of this data through his research in a state-based book series, of which he's got dozens at this point. You know, he's aiming to get it all 50, which is pretty cool. But he's written on a number of other topics as well. So people have taken the time to go and connect with different groups, locations, geographical concentrations, but also like cultural concentrations of ideas in this lore overall, that we can try to make different connections and get the data together in a way that's resourceful and in simple format, like a book. So he's done a great job. He's going to be presenting a little bit later on today. Arkansas. Okay, so this is fun. This is Alex Smith Park, this little pig that was in the middle of the water. I'm very foolhardy to have gone out here on a raft, but it was a cool little excursion. So Arkansas has some interesting locations that people often describe they know and have seen, and has a history of Bigfoot. So Mena, Arkansas is a little bit northwest in Arkansas. They have the Ouachita Mountains up there. They have a festival they've done. And then, of course, he was there, the leading act. It's pretty cool to see him up on stage playing guitar. I never thought I'd see that. But yeah, so Mena, Arkansas has a conference or festival where they actually get together, and it's all outdoors at the zip line place. It's a pretty cool farm. And of course, the big highlight in Arkansas, is probably the most well-known, is the Bigfoot capital of Arkansas, as it's been dubbed, Boggy Creek in Fouke, Arkansas. How many of you guys have been to Arkansas, or not just Arkansas, but Boggy Creek and Fouke, Arkansas before? Not enough of you. That's cool that for those of you who have, but definitely go check it out. It's got some neat stuff. There I am with Lyle Blackburn back almost a whole decade ago in front of Boggy Creek itself, and of course it's renowned for the cult classic movie, The Legend of Boggy Creek. So if you definitely want to be able to get caught up on the history, watch that movie. Of course, it's been remastered. We had an event out there where Charles Pierce did the movie, and his daughter Pam Pierce helped to remaster it, not remake it, but to remaster the old footage. And we had a panel with some of the members who were part of the cast and crew, which is really cool to have that go on there, and to be able to share about it. It's also got Monster Mart, so it's a huge convenience store with the monster and Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Boggy Creek monster theme. There I am with my brother Matthew, who's here with us today. They have a cool statue off on the side of here, and it's just a fun place to go and stop by. People go from all over the world to go check this out. And there's also, of course, the Fouke Monster Festival held every year. This time it's going to be next April, and so I'll just go back really quick. A lot of these people have been around, or you guys probably know them already. We've got Jerry Heston, Lyle Blackburn, Chester Moore, and Jeff Stewart, the crypto host. So pretty cool lineup, and then next year it's going to be on the 25th and 26th. So if you guys are interested in that, I'll be presenting as well. Craig Will here helps put it together, and it's just going to be like the 5th one, I think, or 5th or 6th. So it's cool to see it's been going on for so long. So a lot of great stuff in Fouke, Arkansas. Definitely keep up with that if you're interested in learning about some of the interesting history of the southern Sasquatch, because there are indications that it's not just the Pacific Northwest. There's so much more we can find out here in the south. Colorado, there's a lot of interesting ideas. Now, I haven't spent a whole lot of time up there. There's a whole contingent of people who are up in the Rocky Mountains searching for Sasquatch. Even going to the airport, like Denver or something, you'll find all kinds of novelty items of Bigfoot and things that really help to promote this idea in the most interesting way. So there's Bigfoot. There's tons of little Bigfoot themed material and things for sale. I went to Pikes Peak a number of years ago, and they have Bigfoot stuff all over the place. There's even a sign that says, watch out for Bigfoot and things like that. So it's cool to see. I've got my Bigfoot shirt on there that I got up at the peak, Pikes Peak. So there are a lot of regional areas in the states that people consider that could host these creatures in a way that's so far out and remote from civilization that could very well be the case. Up in Washington, how many of you guys have been up to Washington or the Olympic Peninsula before? It's a beautiful place. I highly recommend you go out there, whether it's for Bigfoot or not. Just spend some time getting out into nature. Wonderful location. There's the Hoh Rainforest, and they put Bigfoot on everything up there. It's a really beautiful place. It's the Hall of Mosses. It looks like it's out of a dream or something. It's really incredible. Definitely go check this out. And of course, Forks, Washington. Searched all over and finally found him at a gas station up there, so we can put this mystery to rest. He's just up there hanging out with a helmet, I guess. And it's just it's a great promotional thing. They know that people love it and are into it, so they'll put it all over stuff. So Washington is a big place to go check out. Bigfoot. Of course, Oklahoma, it's really cool to see that over the years, southeastern Oklahoma and other places have really embraced this idea. A number of years ago, I was driving up Highway 75 in Texas through into Oklahoma, and I passed by this place and I was like, wow, wait, I gotta stop. And I went over and pulled out, took a picture of Bigfoot's barbecue, no one there, it says open. I don't think it actually was, but no one's ever there. It's kind of a tough location. I think it went under, and in recent times, I think Bigfoot has decided to invest in other business opportunities. So now is Bigfoot's Trap House, and you can go stop by. It's got a sister location as well if you're into that sort of thing. So that's cool. Awesome, Bigfoot. Okay, and then basically, you know, along those lines, you can see a number of businesses popping up in Idabel, Hochatown, into that southeastern Oklahoma area. There's a huge sign for this place called Gas Squatch, and it's a really cool convenience store gas station. It's enormous. I'm standing like way in front of it. Very cool sign, very cool place, and there's stuff that's just all around Hochatown, which is not too far away, that's all about Bigfoot. It's kind of like, I jokingly say, it's like the Roswell for UFOs, and this is to that for Bigfoot, so it's kind of a fun place. Have you guys heard about the bounty that they have up there in Oklahoma for Bigfoot? It's up to like $3 million, and it sounds like a joke, but apparently there were some attempts to make this a legal reality, that if anyone can somehow acquire Bigfoot alive, not kill it, so you don't want to kill it, or kill any of them, I guess, but to bring them alive somehow, to capture them, there's apparently a bounty. I think it's a big drive for tourism, and just to get the license to say you did it, but you know, some people are maybe really out there trying to do this. So it's interesting. And of course, I was fortunate to give a keynote presentation at the Oklahoma Bigfoot Symposium earlier this year that's held by the Mid-American Bigfoot Research Center. And they're an interesting group of people up there who are really out into these areas trying to investigate. So they hold this symposium every year. If you guys are interested in heading up there, it's up in like mid-eastern Oklahoma, and small town up there, but it's pretty cool that they have events out in Oklahoma as well. There's also a museum in Talina. I got to stop by with Matthew. We went and checked it out. Really cool stuff. They got a lot of interesting displays. It's hard to see a big Bigfoot up there. Great areas to go and research. So definitely check out this Bigfoot museum. And I should just say that there are, and you guys might know this, there are several museums around the states. And I, would love to be able to go to all of them. I'm just going to share about things I've been involved with. But there's one in California recently that I think just went under, is being auctioned or sold or something. And of course we come here to Louisiana. So I've been out here a number of times, but in different places, and I've never been here in this location. So this is pretty cool. There I am camping out at Lake Foss Point State Park, next to the swamp. Saw some swamp doggies and armadillos and that sort of thing out there. Is pretty cool. A few years ago we had what we call the Bigfoot Road Show in Leesville, Louisiana, and a really fun event. Leesville is also known for having a cryptid that basically seems to be like a giant spider, and I think it's interesting to see. We didn't really have much to do with it there, but it did come up, and it's something that is part of cryptozoological lore, and it's fun to see. Like even Lyle, I think, had dubbed the term the Leesville Leaper, so it's interesting to think that maybe there are some giant creatures, like giant spiders or things like that, still out there somehow. That would be really interesting. And of course we're here, and I just want to make mention and shout out to the Tuttles and everyone who's been involved in putting this together, because I think it's important we see we can either continue this or do something to allow this to be more consistent for you guys here who are local or here in the area, to be able to have something that is more than maybe just this one only. So let's see if we can keep this momentum going and keep the energy going to do more. Now, when it comes to my home state, Texas, there is a great deal of Bigfoot in a lot of interesting ways. There's a plaque here out in Navarro County. The Navarro County rest area has this cool plaque about Bigfoot in Texas, and specifically about the account of Danny Sweeten, I think is who it was, that basically described seeing and having an encounter not too far from here. Craig's done some interesting work about that. It's actually a big part about why the sign's even here. It does refer to the Texas Bigfoot Conservancy and a research conservancy there. It has some interesting artwork, and it's just something you can go see at any point. I'm sure a lot of people do see that and don't think much of it, but if you're into Bigfoot, it's just another place to add to your list of destinations. And this isn't confused with, or shouldn't be confused with Bigfoot, Texas. There he is, we found him, so there's that. But Bigfoot, Texas is a real place. It's south of San Antonio, but it's not about the mysterious creature at all. It's about Bigfoot Wallace, which is a nickname for a Texas Ranger, which has otherwise nothing to do with the elusive cryptid. So it's just fun to see, because if you type in Bigfoot in your GPS, it'll pull it up to take you out here and say, head to Bigfoot. So take these numbers down because, we've got a Bigfoot community center. They're here, and so just call them up. It'll just be able to, answer all of these mysterious questions for us. But anyway, so yeah, this is kind of a fun place here. There's not really anything going on as far as actually this sort of Bigfoot stuff. But we did the first Bigfoot Roadshow in Mineola, which has a cool Bigfoot river type thing that you can go on the Sabine, and it's got a really cool type of situation. This is an event we did where we had a panel and we had presentations just like this. So the Bigfoot Roadshow is actually sort of a side project of the Southeast Texas Bigfoot Conference, which I think is supposed to be coming back. Huge event. There's Jeff Stewart. We had cast from Finding Bigfoot a few years ago, and it was a huge turnout. Shelley's been there, and a number of us have, and it's great to be able to see that it could be returning. So when it, again, comes to Texas, Bigfoot in Texas, Lyle's written a book about it, so there's so many different sightings. Texas is an enormous state, lots of different areas. Pretty much every environment you can imagine. So most of East Texas, which connects to over here, is all woods. You've got the Piney Woods, Sam Houston National Forest, the Big Thicket, and there are several accounts that go back and even into the 1800s of the wild man and wild woman of Navidad. And so it's really important to see that sometimes, even though we don't refer to it as Bigfoot, the stories about tall, hairy people or creatures has been around for years, and I think that's really interesting. And of course, I should give a huge shout out to my buddy Craig Wool here for putting on the Texas Bigfoot Conference year after year. Here's some of the people behind the scenes that aren't always noted, but I think it's great to be able to have people who are involved to help make this event what it is for over 2 decades now. So we're coming up for next year. What are the dates for next year, Craig?
October 18th and 19th, I believe.
So write that on your calendar. You won't want to miss it. It's going to be a good one. And it's really cool. So there's a lot going on. This year for myself was my 10th year to be involved and just to keep track of all the different things that have been shared at that event, from the speakers to the vendors. I'm fortunate to be able to be involved in that way and to have done the media and AV and all those types of things like that. It's a great way to be able to see just the amount of things that go into it over the years. Some of the highlights are in 2018, it was declared the Bigfoot capital of Texas officially, and we had some of the city officials come out, and just recently, a few years back, we had Jefferson being declared a safe haven for Bigfoot officially, and I think that's amazing, and thanks to Craig for helping to establish that. Now a resident there, it's cool to see not only is it one of the most renowned haunted locations supposedly in America, but now it's the Bigfoot capital of Texas, and I think that it'll be something people will want to go and check out pretty much any time. There's a Bigfoot statue there, so definitely check out Jefferson, Texas. It's not too far, but 2.5 hours or so?
2 hours.
So yeah, it's a great way to just get out and go check out some of the East Texas stuff. Texas Bigfoot Conference coming up next year. All right, so what about literature? There's a lot of books out there. You can get your hands on some of the old classics, the Four Horsemen, as it were, or the newer things. Some people have put together and made efforts to have collections, like Stephen Struford of the Bluff Creek Project and the Coalition for Critical Thinking in Bigfoot. He unfortunately had his bookstore burned down not too long ago. So there's some great things that are out there, and even when we try to preserve history and material, it's not always going to work, so it's important to do what we can to network and get things connected. And that's also why this guy, Dan Andrello, put together a Wild Man Literature page on Facebook. So if you're on Facebook, check out this. Everyone on there is not sharing pictures of anything, blurry stuff or reports. It's more about the actual literature of the subject. So it's important to do what we call a literature review. If you're interested in this and doing critical research, or just being creative with your involvement with this, it's good to be aware of what material is out there, what is being discussed, and the literature that is being promoted in a way that we can just be more interested in connecting those ideas together. Pop culture is inundated with Bigfoot. It's a huge thing. Everyone all around the world knows what Bigfoot is tangentially just through the frame 352, that picture like that, right? So it's plastered all over everything, and I guess some interesting things that Russ was sharing about the legal rights to the remaining originals or potential original copies of the Patterson-Gimlin film, because you see this plastered all over what we call frame 352, but no one really has a copyright, supposedly, to be able to license it in a way that, you know, people are getting away with using this all over everything, right? So it's interesting to see. There's a whole Bigfoot running company that makes some cool metals. I've been involved with those. The Great Divide Brewing Company, Tim's. You know, there's so many, and I like collecting. So I should just say on a side note, I'm really interested in doing this. I'm also interested in trying to see all the different brands or companies that use this logo, frame 352, in some way, so people get creative and change things here and there or add things. But I'd like to be able to collect things or take pictures and document things that use that. So if you guys know or have anything or know of any companies that use that would be cool. I'd like to hear from you. And of course, this is a fun one. You guys know Jack Links has used Sasquatch for a long time, messing with Sasquatch. They just recently came out with Chili, where they finally also used frame 352 as their logo, which is really kind of interesting to see them finally do that. So a lot of pop culture stuff, marketing, it's huge for branding as well. It's like universally recognizable. When you see that picture, people immediately might not exactly know what it's really all about, but they kind of get the sensation, okay, that's that weird creature, right? Pretty interesting stuff. Well, what about in media? Bigfoot is huge in media, and there's several podcasts and shows and things like that. Wes Germer and Tony Merkel. Tony's got the Confessionals, and Wes got Sasquatch Chronicles. How many of you guys listen to some of those types of podcasts? There's like hundreds of episodes, right, covering stories, accounts, all of that stuff. And it's a great way for people to be able to share something in a way that you can listen to later on and check out and refer to other episodes. So it's cool to see that and those are just two of many, but there are some of the big ones. Of course, there have been very interesting shows, syndicated shows on television network. Finding Bigfoot, you guys have probably all seen this before. We've had him out to the Texas Bigfoot Conference and a number of other events throughout. And so I got to interview him about not just what he's interested in when it comes to his time on the show, but what he likes about cryptozoology in general. He says that he might have had a sea serpent or aquatic cryptid encounter, and he's also interested in dogman. The dogman phenomenon is very curious. Same thing with Cliff Barackman. I got to talk with him about the importance of cryptozoology and what it can help us understand beyond Bigfoot, which is another podcast that they do as well. So definitely check out what those guys are up to. And to continue on, people like Adam Davis has been involved with a number of worldwide expeditions. He's been seen on Expedition Unknown, and has been all over the world in search of mysterious cryptids. And not just Bigfoot, but he's been to the Himalayas. He's searched for the orang pendek. He's looked for Mokele and Bembe in the Congo, the Mongolian deathworm, all these different interesting concepts. And of course, we've got Russ Ford here. Very cool to have him here with us. And so how many of you guys are big fans of Expedition Bigfoot? Yeah, let's hear a round of applause. Yeah. Cool. So it's awesome to have him here to share about the not just the recent developments in the show, but just the behind the scenes and his own personal journey in all of this, and with, as he mentioned last night, with Bob Gemlin, and just a lot of really cool things that we can discuss and get to talk about. But this show, and I mentioned this last night, this show has done probably, in shows like this, do such an interesting job of connecting with people who are otherwise not maybe just disinterested, but not aware of this subject. Television can reach millions of people. Conferences aren't really doing that. Books really aren't doing that very much. The internet, maybe. But, things are shared in a way that it's just a peripheral to many people out there. So with shows like this, it helps plant the seed. It helps bring this into a greater awareness than almost anything else to generate, whether it's social activism, like doing this, community events, social outings, investigations. It gets people interested in a way that whether you're a skeptic or a believer or anywhere in between, you can do what you're able to add some kind of contribution to this interesting field. And I think that was great to hear him last night helping to generate that here just within our group. So I also got to interview Maria. Maria Mayer came out last year to the Texas Bigfoot Conference, and we talked about the importance of not just her background in primatology, but how making scientific discoveries is really a process and not always instantaneous, and there's a lot of redundancy. And then when it comes to being able to have this kind of background with the involvement of Bigfoot, again, it could lend a lot of potential for incredible discoveries, but there are also some repercussions that in the event we do declare a discovery, what happens after that? So these are some of the interesting anthropological implications I think should be considered when we're looking at this subject. When it comes to media, a little while back we held the Texas Bigfoot Film Festival. There's so many movies and historic classics that are based upon Bigfoot and strange creatures. You can just go and watch things like all week long, or month long I guess, about all of this. And so we aired and showed a lot of really cool stuff in this huge theater in Marshall, Texas, and got to watch a remastered version of Legend of Boggy Creek and a number of others, the Creature of Black Lake, not to be confused with the Creature of the Black Lagoon, the Abominable Snowman, a lot of these other really interesting classics, pretty cool stuff that we got to do at this historic theater there. Alright, and so probably the most well-known cinematic or media-based footage, of course, is you guys were here. How many of you were here last night? So I don't want to go into great detail about this because it would be kind of a bit redundant, but I'll just share that it's really interesting that most of people who think of Bigfoot have the image in their mind of right here, 352, Patty, as she's affectionately dubbed. And if you didn't know, it seemed to be indication that we infer that this is a female due to the large pendulous breasts, and that's something that is often considered, well, why, if they were to fake this, would they add that detail? Roger Patterson did have an interest that he expressed through artistic renditions and some material that have similar qualities, and so some people maybe tie these ideas together. I don't know. I never got to meet or talk with Roger. He wasn't apparently alive much longer after that, but Bob, who was with him at the time during this encounter, is still around. And as Russ mentioned, there's a lot that people talk about when it comes to this, but he has shared his testimony, and which has been rock solid. Very incredible guy, but it's something that, is so far removed that we're just fortunate that most cases, historical cases that we can investigate, there aren't really a lot of people left around to talk to directly. We're fortunate that Bob is still here, which he does say very much that not only does Bigfoot exist, but what they saw there that day was very real. And not only that, but they cast tracks, and they went back to cover him up, because there's a whole escapade of situations that happened apparently that night and when I first talked to him like this, I had no idea. I don't think a lot of people did, but there's a lot of things that went on to help make that happen the way it did. And I got to interview and talk with him a number of times about all of that. So when it comes to what we now call the Patterson-Gimlin film of 1967, over half a century ago now, this is still considered sort of the standard of cinematography and that sort of evidence, videographic evidence. It stands out as some of what people consider the best because it's hard to replicate even today with today's technology and standards. There's so much to it, right? So I've talked to a lot of people, and I'll just make this short because in my doing this, I hope to not convey that, by affiliating myself with any of these people, by interviewing them, I'm not advocating for their stance or point of view necessarily, or just believing them outright, but it's important to talk to people who have an involvement, who have an opinion, who have something to say. In this case, M.K. Davis has analyzed the film. He has inferred his own opinions about it and done things that he, I think, has some confirmation bias on. But I think that it's also important to note that there are people who do what they can to take the time to try to clear up the film, which he's enhanced in some ways to try to figure out what's going on. So that's someone who's done some of that. There have been tons of analysis done by other people, so it's hard to see, but at the Texas Bigfoot Conference and other events, we've had several people come out and do full keynote presentations on just analyzing a few seconds of the footage that we do have, right? Stabilizing it, all of that. There's Cliff Bearkman doing it. Here we've got, it's hard to see, Lauren Coleman, as I mentioned before. And just recently, here at this last one, we had Dr. Jeff Meldrum give a whole presentation on analyzing just the film in general, a lot to it. I want to give a shout out to my buddy, he's gone now, so the late Joe Taylor. He had a creation-based museum out in Crosbyton, Texas, near Lubbock in West Texas. He put together this pretty cool rendition with the feet, which by the way, it's like we see that picture all the time that people use and put on everything. If you go back and you look at it, you can't actually see the feet in that frame. So people have actually kind of taken the time to add that on there. Just kind of fun to see. He put together this big poster of it. And to kind of finish this section off, I had the opportunity to actually go there to the original film location a few years back during an expedition, somewhat related, but not directly related to be able to go there. There's a group called the Bluff Creek Project who has done an incredible job of mathematically mapping out the location. It looks totally different. You have Rowdy Kelly and Robert Leiderman, and they put together a huge compendium called the Bluff Creek Project book. And so this is what we all know is 4352. This is apparently the same location, so I had to go out and reenact and do the paddy walk. It looks a lot different. If it really is where this took place, you can see that there's so many differences. But they were able to determine this using very coordinated and mathematical efforts. So it's pretty cool. Now, kind of coming up towards the end of the Bigfoot idea, I just want to mention that there's a lot that goes into data collection and how we kind of acquire what we think of as evidence and to provide proof to others who are really interested, or to literally to see what we can build as a scientific base of knowledge. Shelley Covington, Montana has done what she can, and I think really helps to encourage citizen science. So being involved in these efforts and being able to kind of get out and collect things and take samples and all this, you don't have to be an accredited scientist, but you can take part in citizen science, which is what any of us can do at any time. Not just with Bigfoot, but to do what you're able to get out in nature, and whether you're submitting that to something, an institution, an agency, a group, professors, whatever it is, there's something all of us can do to get out and be not just scientific minded, be creative with it, but also to be able to be methodic in our process of collecting. So she's going to give a presentation about that. She's got some great stuff and DNA kits and things at her table you can go check out when you're out there and you come across something and you want to be able to preserve it and collect it. It's good to know that you have the resources to do that, but if you don't, you just have to come up with being handy and making do with what you can. So check out Shelley, she's got a great presentation later. And what about evidence? People say that there are different types of evidence. This side has just got pictures of foot casts, footprints, but people talk about there's vocal evidence, witness testimony, so eyewitness testimony, photographic evidence, audio-based evidence from the vocalizations and all that, and people say hair samples, blood samples, scat samples. They're taking all these things. eDNA is a new interesting arena that I think can lend a lot of progress towards not just Bigfoot, but also other interesting zoological challenges as well. So these are all parts of what some people refer to as anecdotal evidence that surmount to, I think, a pretty convincing argument that you could take into a court of law and into a scientific laboratory setting and get some interesting things going. Because you have to remember, it's one thing, and I say this because you can bring everyone in here into a court of law and you can have a jury make a determination. And that doesn't mean really that it's factual, it just means that we can come to a consensus, right? People have often been convicted wrongfully when it's convincing enough to a jury about a situation. So we have to keep that in mind. We can find ways to make things that seem curious and then seem really convincing or compelling and convincing, but it's something that we have to remember is different in different settings. If you're in a court of law, you can build a story or a case, but when you're in a scientific lab, it has to be demonstrable, it has to be repeatable, and you have to do things a little bit different than make a convincing case. I think there's a lot of really interesting things out there when it comes to Bigfoot, but here are some proposed explanations by people who are involved in Bigfoot research. These aren't my explanations, these are explanations from people who I've investigated, interviewed, talked with, things like that. So either we have hoaxes or people in suits, which I think unfortunately does account for some of those, not all of them. But you see things online, you see videos. How many of you guys seen that video from a train in Colorado going by? Well, apparently that was a promotional thing because that's the whole business of the place there. So, that does happen. We would be naive to think that there aren't hoaxes, unfortunately. Misidentified known wildlife, bears, things like that. And of course, we've got a lot of other things. Primates, potentially an undiscovered primate species. Some people say a human-ape hybrid. And then it gets into more lofty ideas like interdimensional, metaphysical concepts. Some people think that they are aliens or somehow involved with UFOs and aliens. Very curious. Some people consider that they are something biblical or that they are things like demons. And I've had people discuss that. I think it's curious. I'd like to be able to hear all perspectives. I think it's good to be well-rounded and open-minded. Some people think that they're mental projections, and some people think that they are manifestations of nature or nature spirits and things like that. I don't discount any of these right off the bat. I do think it's important to consider that, again, everyone interprets things throughout their own lens of perception. That could be heritage, could be cultural upbringing, so many things. It could be religious disposition. So it's important to keep in mind that everyone interprets these things differently. And this is just for Bigfoot. I'm going to run through some of the other ideas that I want to share with you guys really quick. I know this is primarily a Bigfoot conference, but when it comes to how Bigfoot fits into cryptozoology, there are a lot of other mystery creatures and animals. I'm going to share with you guys some of the other interesting things that I've been able to kind of be involved with. I went out on an expedition to Death Valley with Ron Moorhead, Don Monroe, M.K. Davis, and Joe Taylor, because they were pretty convinced that stories and old newspaper reports of giants, there in Death Valley were real. And I don't know. I do think it's curious, so I went along to document the effort. Needless to say, we didn't really find anything, but it's a great way to just get out in general and explore some of these really interesting remote locations. Joe Taylor had a model, a humorous bone here in his museum of what would be a 14-foot tall humanoid. This has often been seen on the internet, and people think that it's real. It's not real. Joe never said it was real. He said it's a creation. It's an artistic demonstration for scale of a potential or alleged finding somewhere, I think, in Egypt. There's the idea of what we call, so we think about big people, giants. If Bigfoot's really big, there might be big people. We do know people have tendencies to grow really large. Some people consider, according to mythological, biblical, and other literature, that there could have been or still could be giant people. Well, if they're giant people, maybe there are little people. There's the idea of the duendes and these small people from different folklore and things. Well, this is the Atacama skeleton. It was analyzed a number of years ago and made a determination that it was not in any way anything more than just a malformed human. And there's still some contest about that, but the idea is that people are finding strange remains. Now, I should say that this is not the real one. I would never be holding the real one like this. Actually, someone did hold it and they broke the arm. But this is a model that had been made from a cast mold. So it just goes to show there are some very strange findings, and when we don't really immediately know what we're looking at, ideas start to come in, and then we generate curiosity, and things kind of get out of hand. So people thought that this might have been an alien or an alien hybrid, but some of the testing that was done for the nuclear and maternal DNA showed that it was just Mesoamerican. People like Brian Forster have gone out into South America and looked at interesting ancient sites, the elongated skulls and things, and people consider that maybe there's something more to these than just humans with long heads, right? So there's this contingent of people who consider that maybe they are not humans or near humans or some other branch of humans or beyond. This is an interesting one. How many of you guys have heard of or maybe even been to see The Thing in Arizona? You have, Craig has. Cool. It's it's a little weird, but it used to be up in a gas station for a long time. They finally threw together this incredible museum kind of display. Basically, they say they found this thing in a cave, and they brought it in, and it's a weird mummy-looking thing. There's a story about it. Now you can go out there, and it's got a whole history of events, and they kind of make it a fun theme called Dinosaurs versus Aliens, which I don't know how that really directly relates, but it's a fun thing for the fun for the family to go check out. But there it is. It's a weird, looks like it could be a paper mache mummy. Some people just immediately write it off. But the idea is still pertinent that people potentially have stories of findings in strange settings, strange remains, and it makes us wonder: are there still things out there to be found? Are there things being concealed? Are there really ideas out there that deal with non-human remains? Whether that's Bigfoot, another cryptid, or some other potentially interesting discovery, there could be a lot out there. I got to check out what was called the Star Child skull a number of years ago. Same type of situation, a skull about 900 years old, found in a cave in Mexico, thought to be by the late Lloyd Pye an alien or an alien hybrid, human hybrid. And then some testing was done to show that it's, again, nuclear and maternal DNA showed that it's Native American and Mesoamerican, and Southern American, and so, or Central American rather. And so it's one of those challenges that, even though that's not a, people want things to be more exotic than they actually are. People want this to be an alien hybrid. It just looks malformed. It probably had something like progeria. It didn't last very long. but because of how it looks and its misshapen form and morphology, we infer that maybe it has to be exotic, it has to be sensationalized. In reality, it's probably just a medical tragedy, unfortunately. But we can still learn a lot from those interesting findings. It was analyzed, as I mentioned, there's Chase Klutsky, Melanie Young, who owned it for a long time, Joe Taylor did some molding, he created reproductions of it. So there's a lot of interesting ideas, and just to kind of wrap this part up, the most recent occurrence of this is the whole ongoing dilemma of the mystery mummies, as promoted by Jaime Maussan. This guy's an interesting, sensational reporter in Mexico, has a whole TV show and talks about strange sightings, UFOs, mysterious phenomena. But he was part of the Mexican Congress reveal of these mummies that are being shown all over the internet now. How many of you guys have seen or heard of that report that brought out the weird bodies about these mummies? Wow, I would definitely go check that out. Now, I'm not saying believe it or it's real, but it's definitely worthy of just knowing that it's happening. So last year, the U.S. Congress held a hearing about UFOs and aliens, making a very generalization about that to make it simple. And then soon after, members of Mexican Congress and other people, including Jaime Maussan, did the same thing, except not only did they come out with a big talk about this idea, they brought out what they considered bodies. So one of the interesting things is that the testimony given in the U.S. setting provided no substance of potential evidence of the claims, which is very difficult. However, in this setting, in Mexico, they did, which is interesting, whether they're real or not. At least they're saying, hey, we've got non-human bodies, and they're not just stories, here they are. So you can type in mystery mummies or Mexican mummies into a search engine, and it'll probably pop up with this guy and things going on. It's an ongoing debate. There are people who think that they're just fake, and I think there are some fake ones, and there are some serious researchers out there who think that they are the real deal, and that not enough is being talked about. So interesting to consider what's going on recently with these mystery mummies. Okay, moving forward, some interesting stuff. I'll just make this part kind of short because I know we're pressed on time here. Not too far from where I live, about an hour south from me, is Glen Rose, Texas, where they have Dinosaur State Park. How many of you guys have ever been to Dinosaur State Park? Cool, awesome, it's a great place, right? I have been fortunate to go out there a number of times. A few years ago they had a bad drought and it revealed, so Paluxy River is the name of the river that Dinosaur Park is kind of based in. And when it dries up, it's revealing of the trackways, as you can see here, of really interesting three-toed prints that are pressed into what is now hard rock, but maybe at one point was a softer sediment material that these could be preserved within, potentially over millions of years, or as some suggest, just a few thousand years. So there's various outlooks. There's a creationist museum and a contingent of creationist people who basically think that this is all very recent and that there are human footprints to be found alongside. I was fortunate that when I went out here, I actually discovered a trackway, not nearly like this, but way off, probably half mile or a mile out that way, really badly eroded tracks that Acrocanthosaurus tracks, which are kind of like T-Rex tracks. They also have sauropod tracks of a Poseidon, Sauroposeidon. It's a huge four-legged brontosaurus-like dinosaur. The depressions in the ground for those are giant round holes like this big, and they're enormous. These are about a foot in diameter or so and about a foot deep. So pretty cool tracks. Regarding the idea of footprints being found nearby or in context of the dinosaur tracks, it's not a new idea. People have contested this for a number of years as the Burdick track. So similar to how people look at footprints potentially left by what we refer to as Bigfoot, there are similar things found that shouldn't really be there if they are real. So people speculate these were just made recently. So the idea is either they're a few thousand years old, several millions of years old, which is wild, or modern because someone made them. And there's a lot of ideas like this. The fossilized finger in the same area, and then the Alvis Delk trap, which you can, it's hard to see, you can see the dinosaur footprint, and then right here, a human-like footprint. And again, the idea is either these are a few thousand years old, several hundreds of millions of years old, or it's modern because someone fabricated this. Interesting, concept to really take into consideration. But when it comes to dinosaurs and humans interacting, there are other ideas that have been seen on what we call the Ica stones. Ica stones depict people and dinosaurs Some or many of them are probably fake, but there might be some authentic ones. So these are what we call out-of-place artifacts. This is not definitely something we never hear about in history class or anything that people say is like a regular known thing. So obviously this is adverse to the mainstream contemporary model of history, and it could mean a lot. As I mentioned earlier, Adam Davis here and John Kirk have both been to the Congo in Central Africa, enormous jungles, kind of like the Amazon, a very dense place, and they have both investigated and tried to search for what we call Mokele and Mbembe, or some people. There's other cultural names and things, but this refers to a potential creature that we might liken to a dinosaur. So some people actually do think there's a living dinosaur, like a sauropod, which is a sauropod fossil right there, that could be alive or has been living up until recent times in the Congo, in the jungles. That would be amazing. And I think that there's still a lot of creatures that live there that maybe not be as exciting as a dinosaur type creature, but that people still find and are discovering all the time. And they also say that, that there are these avian cryptids that look like pterosaurs or pteranodons, or in other words, pterodactyls. So there's my colleague Ken Gerhardt. He wrote his book, Big Bird, about these encounters that people are describing, seeing things like this. Now, there could be some misidentifications there. People could be seeing cranes and storks and things like that. I'm sure that might account for some of them, but people are adamant, and actually credentialed people. I mean, everyone's valid, but people who are teachers and are of sound mind, to make assessments in science, describe seeing pterodactyls in modern times. And that's definitely not supposed to happen. So either something's going on that is totally different than our conventional models of history when it comes to wildlife and dinosaurs and all of that, or people are seeing something that they really do think is a pterodactyl, and maybe it is or maybe it isn't, but very curious phenomenon. So Lyle Blackburn and Ken Gerhardt put together an American Monsters Tour documentary about this, as you can go check out and ask him about it at his table too. Mothman. Now, this is a little bit of an offset from the traditional cryptozoological outlook. Mothman is thrown in here because I do think it could be considered an avian cryptid. But before the nomenclature of Mothman was really prevalent, they called this the Mason County bird, and people were describing seeing an enormous bird, not a anthropomorphic moth humanoid. So it's really funny because now they have a statue here that looks like that. It's cool. I've been out there, I've gone to the locations, but the story essentially is that unfortunately, in this time frame, people were very terrorized decades ago in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, about something humanoid, possibly, or with wings, that was dealing with different groups of people around Point Pleasant in a way that it instilled fear and was very traumatic and became known as the Mothman. And it was seen near these bunkers here and in the Clinton Wildlife Management area. And it's, now there's a huge festival. How many of you guys have ever been to Point Pleasant, West Virginia? Well, definitely go check it out. There are festivals like so much stuff. There's thousands of people. It's a huge festival every year, and definitely want to just throw that out there. Quickly, phyllid cryptids, basically cats or mystery cats, is a big idea. What is this? Who knows what this is? Yeah.
Black panther.
Okay.
What is it?
This is a more than likely a domesticated house cat that's probably not even up to my knee. I took this picture next to the field I work, and I took it for perspective because there's not a lot of scale to use to try to figure out what's going on here, right? But I do know, based upon seeing this like all the time, that cat's like this tall. It's perspective, though, that makes it give the impression that it could be a black big cat, or what people call black panther or something, right? Now, this is a black leopard. Now, people say, black panther or black jaguar, things like this. This is at the zoo, but this is to put it in perspective. You can see the long tail, right? You can see the elongated snout and nose, the mandible there, and the body is very slim. Now, house cats can often be misidentified in this way. And I think it's really important to know that we have a lot of that happening in Texas and in other places, probably here in Louisiana, of people what they describe as black panthers or black mountain lions. And apparently there's not supposed to be any, and officially speaking, there's not really indication that they exist, but people are seeing something. I do think it's important that we do acknowledge that the reports out there can be looked into, but I think there's enough to show there's a high concentration of something going on for with big cats out there in the wild, and encroached areas that force them into denser city populations. So it's good to keep an eye on that. Really quick, okay, so the chupacabra, interesting concept. It's been taken into pop culture as in a superstitious urban legend or lore that has twisted into a lot of ways. The El Chupacabra of Puerto Rico is not really the same as what we call the Texas Blue Dog. There's Chester Moore, he's going to be coming up here in just a moment, and my brother Matthew with a mounted chupacabra, which is pretty interesting to see. It gives you the impression that this is like a really weird creature. But unfortunately, a lot of times the people who are describing these, it seems to be a canid or something like a coyote or dog, or even raccoons that have a condition like mange that makes their hair fall out, and just different qualities that make them seem very weird and deranged and erratic in their behavior. So there's something to what's going on. I don't think it's a species necessarily, I think it's a condition. And we've got to be careful about, when we encounter things like that, it could be that they're probably dealing with a disease of something. So in the San Antonio Zoo, Ken Gerhardt is a volunteer down there. They had actually, I think it's still there, a pretty cool chupacabra exhibit you can go check out, which is a lot of fun. There's also a lot of promotional things like branding and marketing, just like Bigfoot. Chupacabra Kitchen, the Chupacabra Cantina, these are in Texas as well. Cool branding ideas, it's fun to see the interplay. And I went through stuff and found this old picture from, 2013 of us, Craig, there's Lyle, Nick Redfern, Ken, David Coleman out there at an event we did a number of years ago. That was kind of fun to look back at. And of course, here we've got the Rougarou. How many of you guys have heard of the Rougarou before? Awesome. That, like this many hands for that is like super cool. Okay, so very interesting concept. It's often portrayed visually as this sort of werewolf type shapeshifter. And I went to the Audubon Zoo and they had a whole display, and it was like Easter time, so they gave him a basket and like bunny ears and everything, which is why and eggs everywhere. So you can go to the zoo there in New Orleans and check it out. It's like they have little promotional things. I got this big magnet and it says the Louisiana Swamp Monster. I think that was so cool to get at a zoo, and plaques all around different towns. Pretty cool. And because we're on sort of the canid section, Dogman, I'll just make this quick, because people think that maybe there's some interesting ideas between Dogman and Bigfoot. I'll just say that just like with people who are interested in Bigfoot, there's a lot of people who are interested in Dogman specifically. They wonder if it's what we call the werewolf is different. The idea of a werewolf is someone, like a person shape-shifting into one, because of a full moon or whatever, but Dogman is apparently dog all the time. And there are different types. Apparently you have like the German Shepherd kind, and these like really fierce ones. I don't know, I've never seen anything like this, but people claim to have. And so we had a conference called the Dogman Conference. We had two of them. There might be more. Josh Turner of the Paranormal Roundtable put together. I did the AV for the event. I spoke at the second one. So there are people interested in this idea that there are dog people, humanoids out there, some kind of anthropomorphic dog. And that's curious. And some people say that maybe it's Bigfoot, but people are misidentifying it because of certain qualities. So interesting ideas about Dogman. And that also relates a bit to skinwalkers. I've been fortunate to talk with the Navajo Rangers, what they call the Paranormal Rangers, John and Stan here. I introduced them at a number of events that I've been involved with hosting, like the Roswell Festival and the Edinburgh Festival down in South Texas and New Mexico up there. And the Navajo Rangers here, the skinwalker is a novel concept. So they are very well versed in the lore of skinwalkers and basically what it implies. It's kind of like a witch that can use the remains of something to shapeshift into that form, which is pretty curious to think if that's really going on. And then quickly I'll go through the aquatic cryptids, basically things that are seen in or around water. This is at the Lake of the Pines. There's stories of giant catfish out there. And I should just say, this is just to also show and demonstrate that sometimes cryptids or mysterious encounters are often misidentified or just really end up being normal and known wildlife that are completely disproportionate, like huge catfish or huge animals that are really known animals but just disproportionate to their known morphology sizes. So when it comes to that, of course, this is sort of an honorable mention because I don't think it's really an aquatic cryptid so much as it's just been spotted around and described within the proximity of Lake Worth. So we have what we call the Lake Worth Monster over in Lake Worth, Texas near Fort Worth. How many of you guys have heard of the Lake Worth Monster before? Cool. So I should just say this because it's got a bit of history. Just 2 years after the Patterson-Gimlin film in '69, people were describing seeing this scaly goat man out at Lake Worth during like a lover's lane type situation, jumping at people's cars, trying to get them out of their vehicles and things. And it was written about in the newspapers, as I mentioned, by my buddy, the late Jim Mars. He wrote the original articles in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. And then the next day, because of that, people came out and wanted to kind of hunt down this thing and see what's going on. And it ended up throwing a tire out at them. Now, there's a sign these days that actually does have an official Fort Worth City logo that talks about mythological wildlife, which is pretty cool. The idea is that this creature, described with hair, being light-colored, potentially having horns or scales, was seen in and around the water and out towards what's called Greer Island. So there's some really interesting concepts that this could have been a Bigfoot-like creature or more of an anthropomorphic goat humanoid satyr type creature from like Greek mythology. But people are curious if it was just a real or a prank, and some people do say it was a prank. Apparently it threw a tire to people. Here's a fun reenactment. There's Craig and Lyle's up here, and we had a great turnout for a meetup that we did a number of years ago. But I'll just say that 5 years ago we had the 50th anniversary. Pretty cool. They brought us out, did some talks and everything, and then just last few weeks ago we did the 55th anniversary, and I did some tours out to the locations, the historic locations of this interesting tale, and I think it's cool to see that maybe there's more interest that they'll keep on going and doing more. So that was really cool. This is a fun one, just threw in here just because it's part of like the lore. The Oklahoma octopus, I think, was really something that was made up for the Lost Tapes show, if you guys ever seen that. But it was said to have been in Lake Thunderbird, so I actually got to go out there and go out on the water and look around. Didn't find anything, but I think it was really cool to see that. It's something, I don't think an octopus could survive. It would probably get eaten or killed immediately. So then I'll say this is kind of the focal point of where I'm leading off with this, is the giant salamanders. How many of you guys have heard of the giant salamanders from China or Japan? They are real, and there's some out there. They're hard to find, and some are in captivity and being habituated. But so there's this idea of a cryptid known as the Trinity Alps giant salamander up in the Pacific Northwest. And it's really cool because people usually have just journaled about it when they're out on a Bigfoot expedition. And I'll just share this. So Lauren Coleman sponsored what we ended up doing was a expedition out there a few years back, and myself, along with Jason Kontz, Ken Gerhard, J.D. Wayne, and Jim Whitehead, we went out to explore the historic locations in the Pacific Northwest and got to look into what was going on. And we did find some Pacific giant salamanders. Nothing huge, but they were, pretty sizable. And it was great to be able to see that, that there are potentially places where wildlife like that is not easily accessible and can thrive. So it would be cool to be able to get back out there. Our work was published in a number of things like Bigfoot Quest magazine. We were also featured on the Bluff Creek special, on this Small Town Monsters documentary. And there's a guidebook that was published, as well as some material. So I have a production I'm working on that kind of showcases and documented what we did out there in our efforts to try to locate and determine what was going on with this giant salamander. Now I have a clip. I'm not going to play it for sake of time, but if you're interested, I'd definitely be able to give you a link and you can check it out. So to wrap things up here today, I appreciate everyone's patience. Cryptozoology is very fascinating. I think it lends a lot of potential. What I will say is this. So when it comes to cryptozoology overall, there's cultural outlooks and proposed theories. I talked about this with Bigfoot already, but the idea is either we have hoaxes, we know that there are hoaxes, unfortunately, misidentified known species, but there could be a lot of potential for undiscovered species and things that are really out there that we can discover and make some really interesting things with. So are there prehistoric, potentially relic species out there yet to be discovered? I don't know, but people think that there could be, and of course, the idea of ethnozoology and native knowledge about groups that know about creatures or animals or wildlife in their area that foreigners to them come in and don't know about, so it's a new discovery to them. So we could be dealing with a number of all of these things, or it could be a number of interpretations as well. Apophania and pareidolia is really prominent, and these, unfortunately, I should say that these communities are stricken with this. It's like when we see patterns in the clouds, it's the same thing that happens when we see things outdoors. And so we have to be careful and being level-headed and I think objective in our approach in all this. Could some of these weird creatures be mutations, and so not actually different animals or species, but just altered species or modified genetics of known animals and wildlife? Sure. But I will end off with this to kind of leave you guys to have some things to consider when it comes to the cultural outlook and also, you know, the different types of ways that we consider what's going on with these mystery encounters. The possibility of promoting, so this is essentially what cryptozoology is, it's the possibility of promoting scientific challenges to make us figure out like more about our own world and each other. It has a big potential for media sensationalism. Obviously that can go both ways. But also pop culture and commercialization is huge. You have marketing for this potential, you know, all over the place, as we just talked about. You know, it encourages critical thinking and open-mindedness, because some people never thought much of this until maybe they had their own encounter, and they want to be able to share it with people who aren't going to ridicule them. So it's important that we have that supportive network. It also promotes interest in zoology, animal behavior and science, as well as social awareness about these topics like we're doing here today, as well as nature exploration in the outdoors. But overall, just being compassionate for wildlife and for each other, knowing that not only do we live in a world full of interesting intrigue and mysteries, but it should help us bring us closer together in a way that we need to be careful to protect this place and to seek a deeper understanding about what we're dealing with, not just with those creatures, but how we can make sense of what we can do to you know, ensure that we're leaving it for future generations. And for, again, like I said, you know, all this media that I've shared here can be accessed and found on my page of the Vortex. I'd be glad to talk with all of you guys afterward. Stay around because there's some great talks coming up by everyone else. Cool vendors. I want to give a shout out and thanks to the Tuttles and everyone else for putting it together. We're going to have Chester Moore come up to make announcements, and I just want to thank you guys for your time. Appreciate it. Thanks.